Dawn was just beginning to appear behind the mountains to the east. Impatiently, the donkey stomped his feet against the cool, damp morning air as Joseph once again loaded the provisions upon the animal's back. The bags were lighter than when they had started, well over a week ago. The wineskins were almost empty. Bread, some cheese, and nuts were all that was left. Joseph looked at his young wife, great with child, and once again prayed for protection. The sky was cloudy and dark, but no rain was falling, which was a blessing this time of year. Ever since the census decree had gone out from Caesar Augustus that all should be registered in the city of their lineage, Joseph had dreaded this journey. It had been only 9 days, but it seemed much longer since they had left Nazareth. As the raven flies, Bethlehem was due south along the plain of the Jordan River, but that road meant traveling through Samaria, a dangerous and unclean place for a Jew. Instead, they traveled east over the mountains and then across the Jordan, where they turned south and followed the river. 2 days ago, they crossed back over the Jordan and traveled into the hills surrounding Jerusalem, and now they were finally within 1 long day's journey of Bethlehem. The days had fallen into a rhythm. They rose early to avail themselves of as much daylight as possible. Since Jewish men were required to travel to Jerusalem for high feast days, the route was well traveled. Villagers along the way opened their homes and provided places to stay for the night. Shelter, food, and water for the people as well as the animals. Frequent trips allowed relationships to form. Both Joseph and Mary had made this journey many times in the past as children with their families. Fondly, they recalled those adventures, meeting up with friends and extended family and celebrating together. Last evening, they stayed with some of Joseph's friends just east of Jerusalem, catching up on the news of the city and the politics of the temple. Their hosts had shared their breakfast with them, given them a couple of loaves of bread, fed and watered their donkey, and then had said their goodbyes. It was a long distance and a difficult time of year to travel under the best of circumstances, but Mary was so close to her time. Joseph bent to help Mary mount the donkey. Mary gritted her teeth, but no complaint escaped her lips. She wore heavy woolen cloaks over her long robe and heavy woolen socks inside her sandals, for though the temperature was moderate, the air was damp and cool in the early morning hours. As gently as he could, Joseph helped her onto the animal. Placing his own pack upon his back, he picked up his traveling staff and once again resumed the journey for what he hoped would be the last day. The first few days of the journey had been most unbearable for Mary, but she had learned to settle into the rhythm of the donkey. Even so, they had to stop frequently. Joseph was patient and kind. She knew, as he did, that there was safety in numbers, and it was very important to stay in the caravan as they traveled. Their party had been large at the outset, but as the days passed, others had their own schedules to keep, and while many looked upon the young couple with understanding and tender eyes, the caravan had to keep moving. Mary and Joseph would watch them go on ahead, hoping that other travelers would soon come along. Today was no different. As Mary rode, Joseph walked beside. They spoke of the evening before, reliving bits and pieces of the conversation, sharing their thoughts on the news they had heard, sharing memories that those friends and these places brought forth. Eventually, as the morning grew brighter, they both fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. They had already stopped twice for Mary to rest. Falling behind the caravan they had joined that morning. Once again, they were alone on the road. Mary noticed a tightening around her middle that would come and go, not urgent and not well defined, just there. This had happened before, and she expected it would pass again. Another sign of her body readying itself for the impending birth. Her mind began to wander, but it soon fixed on the 700-year-old prophecy of Micah. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are little among the thousands of Judah, out of you shall come forth to me the one to be ruler in Israel, whose going forth are from of old, from everlasting. Was it just 9 months ago that the angel Gabriel had appeared to her and her world had been turned upside down? She had been of marriageable age only a short time when her family had been approached by Joseph's father. Mary was a quiet person. She came from a solid family, but not one of prominence. Her childhood was uneventful. She knew her role and responsibility as a woman was to marry and bear children. Solomon had dispensed much wisdom when it came to the role of a good wife, saying, "An excellent wife is the crown of her husband, but she who causes shame is like the rottenness of his bones." It was not her responsibility to choose a husband for herself. But she had witnessed enough of life to know that the choice of husband was one of utmost importance for her future. She had wondered more than once about the one who would take her to be his wife. Would he be kind? Would he be tender? Would he be faithful? Would he be respectful? Would the sound of his voice cause her heart to leap with love or cower in fear? Though Nazareth was not a large village, she had not formally met Joseph. She knew who he was and that he seemed to be a good man from a solid family. He was older than she, but not terribly so, just old enough to have established himself as a carpenter that could provide for a wife and eventually a family. Like her, he didn't stand out so much as he seemed to stand firm, ready to fulfill the role Yahweh called him to, husband and father, and he seemed kind, which meant everything to Mary. Ah, those were heady days when the two families came together to work out the ketubah, the contract describing how the groom would provide for his bride and the dowry that the bride's family provides. Both families approached the process with all seriousness, for it was a contract once entered into that could only be dissolved by death or divorce. Once the negotiations were completed, her father approached her to ask if she would consent to be Joseph's wife. "Yes, Abba," she had cried. Tears of joy and relief flowed freely down her cheeks as a delightful smile graced her lips. Joseph prepared the wine, and Mary remembered blushing when she and Joseph shared the third cup of the betrothal ceremony, signifying that the covenant was complete. Joseph looked into her eyes with tenderness and love as he prepared to leave. He pledged to come to take her as his wife, and she pledged to wait in purity and faithfulness until his return. Once home, Joseph began to prepare the bridal chamber in his father's house, and Mary began the preparations to fulfill her role as wife while she awaited his return. Meanwhile, she took extra care that her reputation remained unstained. She would not leave her home unaccompanied. She and Joseph, though certainly excited about one another, sought to honor both Yahweh and their parents. They allowed no room for temptation. Both were keenly aware of the consequences of being unfaithful to their vows. They both understood that Yahweh loved his children, and his commands were meant for their safety, security, and protection. It didn't happen often, but betrothals had been broken in the past, and Mary and Joseph had witnessed the consequences. It was sad and hard. This fate would not be theirs. They would remain true. The child moved in her womb. The tightening around her middle continued. Breathing deeply as the midwife back in Nazareth had taught her, Mary returned her thoughts to the moment her world had changed. Young, betrothed and waiting for her bridegroom, everything changed when the angel Gabriel appeared to her, saying, "Rejoice, highly favored one, the Lord is with you. Blessed are you among women." Startled, she wondered what manner of greeting this was, and who this was that suddenly appeared before her, glowing in light. He was one having the appearance of a man, yet she knew he was not a man. This was an angel of the Lord. Truly, this was a divine encounter, but even now, as she remembered, she could not describe it in words. She knew even then that he was real and that he spoke truth, but what did it mean? She had no warning, no thought or premonition that she would find favor in the eyes of Yahweh. She was a common person from an ordinary family in a small village, betrothed to a common man from an ordinary family in that same small village. Why had they been chosen? Just like every other young child, she had sat first at her mother's knee and then in the Hebrew school of the book and learned her heritage and about her people and about Yahweh through the teaching of the Holy Scriptures. She learned all of the ordinances of the holy days and about the feasts, how they told both the history of her people and pointed forward to the fulfillment of Yahweh's promises yet to come, especially the promise of Messiah. She knew Yahweh created the heavens and the earth for his glory and that he had chosen her people for his own. She had memorized the scriptures, the history, the prophets, the writings of wisdom. She pondered the lives of the heroes of faith. Often while studying the accounts of the men and women the Lord had chosen, Mary had put herself in their place. She marveled at the courage of Sarah to simply go with Abraham to a land unknown because God commanded. Would she have done the same? What if Yahweh filled her with wisdom and called upon her to judge his people as he had Deborah? Would she have obeyed? Mary remembered fondly when she had first learned of Queen Esther. Every little Hebrew girl imagined herself as the beautiful queen, listening to Mordecai's words, "Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" And the courageous queen's reply, "Go, gather the Jews who are present and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 nights and 3 days. I and my maids will do the same. Then will I go to the king in violation of the law, and if I perish, I perish." Mary marveled at Esther's courage and obedience. Would she have had such courage? Her thoughts returned. The road ahead seemed to have no end. A tightening of the muscles around her belly grew stronger and more regular, although not nearly as close together as the midwives had warned her when birth was imminent. Mary stroked her swollen belly and tried to stretch her weary back. In the last few months, she had found herself thinking often of these obedient and courageous women of old, and she came to understand that their faith in Yahweh and their courage to obey came not from themselves, but from the Lord himself. In this she found much comfort. Beside her walked Joseph. While keeping up a steady pace, he was acutely aware of Mary's every labored breath. The new responsibility of husband and impending fatherhood rested heavily upon his shoulders. Like Mary, he had been taught the Holy Scriptures and the teaching of the rabbis. First as a child and then as a young man, Joseph yearned to be called by Yahweh for some unique purpose. How many times had he imagined himself as Moses, challenging Pharaoh and leading his people out of Egypt? He loved the account of Samson, filled with the Spirit of the Lord, fighting the Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. Ah, to be David, slaying the mighty Goliath! These men were his heroes. These men were brave and fearless for God. What an honor to be called by Yahweh! He never quite understood why Moses had been so reluctant when the Lord spoke to him out of the burning bush. There was no doubt in young Joseph's mind that he would leap at the chance to serve if only Yahweh would call. As Joseph had grown into manhood, he left the fancied imaginings of a young boy behind. He was thankful that Yahweh had provided him with the skills of a carpenter and was calling him to the important role of husband and father. He was thoughtful and meticulous in his work and had developed a budding business in Nazareth. In time, Joseph's father, Jacob, sought to choose a bride for his son. Jacob's family was not prominent, but he was a solid member of the community, and he began his search among the families of his synagogue. Joseph remembered the day Jacob pointed out Mary's father among the worshippers. Joseph never approached Mary directly, but he made inquiries and discovered the times and places where he might catch a glimpse of his future bride. He was pleased when first he saw her. She was pleasant in appearance, with a quiet disposition and a delightfulness about her. Even now, all these months later, Joseph still held his breath at the memory of the moment Mary was asked for her consent. When she had agreed to become his wife, Joseph's heart almost skipped a beat, so hard was it pounding in his chest. He remembered the blush of Mary's cheeks as they drank the third cup, finalizing the marriage covenant. Mary removed her sandal and gave it to Joseph as a symbolic Jewish gesture of surrendering her heart to him. The sun was high. Half the day was gone. The blush of Mary's cheeks was now due to the chill of the air. The same prophecy of Micah sounded in Joseph's mind, "But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah." He turned with tenderness to look at Mary. He saw the tightening of her lips and knew the birth pains had begun. He heard her slow and deliberate breathing and saw her place her hand upon her swollen belly. He called a halt and lifted her gently to the ground. Out of the saddlebags he removed the last of the wineskins, mostly empty now, and some bread given to them by their hosts last night, and some cheese and nuts. Mary laid out the meager fare while Joseph led the donkey to a nearby stream for water. As he gave thanks for the meal, once again he pleaded silently that their journey would end tonight and Mary's time would be easy. Soon they were back on the road. Seeking to divert Mary's attention from her uncomfortable position on the donkey, Joseph said, "Tell me again about your visit to your cousin Elizabeth." Mary smiled in spite of herself. Such a treasured memory to share. "We heard," Mary began, "of unusual happenings with Elizabeth and Zechariah. Zechariah was both a priest and a righteous man before the Lord. Elizabeth was barren, Both were well advanced in years. One day, as Zechariah was performing his duties in the temple, the angel Gabriel appeared to him and announced that Elizabeth would give birth to a special son who would prepare the way for the Lord. Zechariah was told that he would be silent and unable to speak until the proper time when all of this would come true. Out of concern for Elizabeth and Zechariah, Mary went to visit them. She was quite eager to share with her cousin the news of her own betrothal. When I arrived, I called out to Elizabeth in greeting, and hearing my voice, she rushed to meet me, embraced me in her arms, crying, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb." I felt the babe in Elizabeth's womb leap for joy. Elizabeth continued, saying, "Blessed is she who has believed that what the Lord has said to her will be accomplished." I was astounded. No one knew of Gabriel's visit to me. My spirit soared. I will always remember how I answered her. "My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit has rejoiced in God my Savior. For he has regarded the lowly estate of his maidservant. For behold, henceforth all generations will call me blessed." We embraced again, overcome with joy and excitement. Zechariah, hearing all the commotion, joined us in the celebration, and his heart too was filled with joy. With the combination of gestures and facial expressions that was now Zechariah's language, he queried how I had been told of these things to come. When I spoke of the appearance of Gabriel, his face beamed and tears of joy flowed as he nodded with recognition. Then I told them about my betrothal. They rejoiced with me. When the time came, it was so hard to leave. A faraway look flitted across Mary's face as she once again grew quiet, remembering the events after her arrival back at home. The days passed quickly upon Mary's return. She often wondered when Joseph would come and claim her as his wife. Gabriel's prophecy had indeed come true, but she had spoken of it to no one except her cousin Elizabeth. The days came and went, weeks and then a month, but the bridegroom did not come. Mary's mother, remembering her own time of waiting, gently reassured her that Joseph was a good man from a good family, and that Joseph's father would not allow Joseph to come for his bride until all was ready. As the waiting continued, changes began to occur in Mary. Not obvious to others, but Mary's mother noticed anyway. She spoke gently with Mary, confirming what she already thought. Mary was with child. It was with a heavy heart that Mary's father went to the rabbi. The rabbi in turn spoke with Joseph and his family. After a tense time of waiting, the reply came back from the rabbi. Joseph must quietly divorce Mary. The betrothal would be broken. Mary need no longer wait with eager anticipation for Joseph to claim her as his bride. Her heart was shattered, but with an inner strength that she knew came only from God, she simply bowed her head and remained silent. Now she experienced the courage that she knew Sarah and Deborah and even Esther of old had also known. She clung to the words that Gabriel had spoken to her. "Rejoice, highly favored one, the Lord is with you. Blessed are you among women." The afternoon sun was peeking through the clouds as Joseph walked alongside Mary and the donkey. He too was lost in his memories. Friends and customers alike had congratulated him on his betrothal. The reality of marriage with all the privileges and responsibilities had motivated him to work hard in the shop during the day and even harder on the bridal chamber at night. He had imagined the joyous look on Mary's face when she would see the bridal huppah for the first time. As the days passed, he had imagined growing old with Mary. In his mind's eye, he had seen their home bustling with children, the girls learning from their mother and the boys working with him in his trade. He would build his carpentry business to be the best in Nazareth. Eventually, he would be an elder in the synagogue. They would be glorious days. It was after the evening meal when a knock was heard at the door. His father had responded and returned with the rabbi. This was highly unusual. The rabbi had a troubled look, and after refusing any food or drink, asked to speak with Jacob and Joseph alone. With a heavy heart, the rabbi explained that Mary's father had asked him to deliver a message. Mary is with child. Joseph was certain he had misheard. He asked the rabbi to repeat himself. Shock silenced Joseph's tongue. His mind raced. This could not be true. Mary was faithful. She was a virtuous woman. She would never betray him. Quietly, the rabbi and Jacob waited for Joseph to absorb the news. The rabbi agreed to return the following evening for Joseph's response. Jacob and Joseph had talked long into the night. Jacob had offered solace to Joseph's broken heart and shattered dreams, but there were no words that would satisfy. In the end, Joseph decided to divorce Mary quietly. When the rabbi returned the following evening, he was told of the decision and that he should begin the proceedings. Even amidst his own hurt, Joseph remembered pleading for secrecy, that Mary not be humiliated. That night, Joseph laid upon his bed, mind swirling, thoughts racing. It made no sense to him. How had this happened? He pleaded with God for answers. The bridal chuppah was complete, but Mary would not see it. He knew that others outside his family would take notice, and they would wonder and ask questions. Yahweh, what do I tell them? How do I protect Mary? What will happen to her? Exhausted, he fell into a troubled sleep, but the Lord had heard his cry. An angel appeared in his dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary to be your wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit, and she will bring forth a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. Instantly awake, Joseph sprung from his bed, dressed himself in the garments of a bridegroom, and raced to tell his father that he would take Mary after all. She would be his wife, and she would be his wife that very night. Giving his approval for Joseph to go, he helped his son saddle the donkey, the same one that walked this road to Bethlehem beside him now, and trotted to the home of Mary's father, while his own father made haste to summon the rabbi. The moon was full and cast a silvery glow upon the surrounding fields. In the moonlight, with a gentle breeze, the palm fronds danced as if giving expression to the joy of his own soul. He knocked on the door. Mary's father answered. Stunned at the sight of Joseph in his wedding garments, he just stood there, staring at Joseph. I've come to take my bride, Joseph announced. Mary's mother appeared behind her husband. Joseph observed a combination of joy and relief in her face as she hurried away to get Mary for the arrival of her bridegroom. Mary! Arise! Prepare! Put on your wedding veil! The groom has come to claim you as his bride! Tears of delight flooded down her mother's cheeks, and Mary cried in joy. As Mary's father found his tongue, he began to talk excitedly with Joseph. He, too, had been overcome with happiness for his daughter. Taking her by the hand, he handed her over to Joseph and pronounced his blessing upon them. Joseph lifted Mary onto the donkey and silently led them to his father's home. Upon their arrival, Mary was welcomed by her new family. The couple was blessed by the rabbi, and when Joseph lifted the veil from Mary's face and their eyes met, he whispered quietly in her ear, I know that the babe within you is the child of the covenant. This is a miracle. The long-awaited one has come. Now beside the road the shadows had grown long. Bethlehem was in sight, and the sun was setting behind the village. Mary's time was near. The roads and inns were full of travelers, for it was the time of the Feast of Trumpets and the Day of Atonement, and a decree had gone out that all should be registered in the city of their lineage. From inn to inn Joseph went, begging for a place for his wife, but one after another closed their doors, for there was no room. Yahweh, where are you now? Joseph cried out. You have brought us here, but where shall this child be born? On the outskirts of the village was a cave, used to shelter livestock, hay, straw, and grain. As the sun dropped below the horizon, Joseph made a bed of straw for Mary and built a fire for warmth and light. With courage born of God and divine protection upon her, Mary gave birth to a son. Joseph, taking the baby in his arms and speaking ever so softly, said, "His name shall be Jesus, for he shall save his people from their sins." Outside, unknown to them, a star appeared, and the heavens were filled with a great multitude of angels singing, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men." Upon the bed of straw, mother and child slept peacefully. Joseph stood watch and marveled at all that happened. Since Adam's sin, the Lord had promised a Redeemer, one that would crush the head of Satan. Here was the Anointed One. The promises whirled in his mind. "Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son. And you, Bethlehem, out of you will come one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times." God's promise was fulfilled this night. Then another prophecy came unbidden to Joseph's mind. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Joseph pushed those thoughts away, not certain what they meant, and settled instead upon another. "A shoot shall come forth from the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall produce much fruit. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord." How could he raise this child to be Messiah? Surely there was someone else the Lord could have chosen. The household of a rabbi or a priest would be a far better place. But in the midst of his query, Joseph began to smile, for God had chosen him. Peace bathed his soul, for this was not his doing, but God's, and God would make the way. Darkness gave birth to dawn. Mary stirred, and she nestled the sweet babe closer. How tiny he was! How perfect! She began to sing the words of Isaiah to her baby, "For unto us a child is born." And Joseph joined his voice with hers, "Unto us a son is given, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. He will bring peace to all the world." As Mary held her babe ever so close, she gazed upon his peaceful sleep, her little Prince of Peace. Son, not of Joseph, but the Christ of God. She recalled the pronouncement of her husband, "He shall be called Jesus, for he shall save his people from their sins." The road that led from Nazareth to Bethlehem had been long and hard, but she knew that the road ahead for her son, God's Son, would be even more difficult, for peace on earth would not come without great cost. And Mary pondered these things in her heart.